Hello, everyone. When it comes to the dangers of bodybuilding, the tragedies in it, we all remember the tragedies of Nasser El Sambati, Dallas McCarver, Sean Roden, Cedric McMillan, and others. Athletes are passing away frighteningly often today. Fans of bodybuilding and all those who followed its development in 1990-2000 were among the first to remember Mohammed Benaziza. His death in the fall of '92 after winning the Dutch Grand Prix shocked the world of iron sports. Then the sad news about the death of a top athlete at the peak of his form caused a real shock in the ranks of bodybuilding fans. But Mom, as the fans affectionately called Mohammed, was only 33 years old, and he was one of the few who beat Dorian Yates himself to the future six-time Mr. Olympia. And this is with more than modest dimensions. Benaziza was only 160 centimeters tall and had a competitive weight of 85 kilos. Nevertheless, many experts argued that he could claim victory at the Olympia. Despite his short stature, the athlete had an outstanding developed musculature and a beautiful, harmonious physique. His free posing programs always looked interesting and fresh. I don't know if he had any chances of winning the main IFBB tournament, but Momo was definitely heading for it and dreamed of one day lifting a statuette of Sandoval over his head. But he did it at too high a price. Mohammed Benaziza was born on January 1, 1959 in Algeria. He spent his childhood and youth in France, as his family moved there shortly after his birth. From an early age, he was passionate about playing soccer, and in his teens he started going to the gym to gain some weight. Benaziza was not tall, and in order to compete with the bigger rivals in the soccers, he began his training. Soon Momo realizes that he likes weight training more than playing soccer. At this point, he decides to stop bodybuilding. Benaziza did not perform for the first 6 years of training, but when he finally decided, he raised the bar as high as possible. He went to the IFBB Amateur World Championship in 1987. He competes in the lightweight category up to 70 kilograms and confidently takes the first place as a reward, receiving a professional card. Our hero begins his career in pro bodybuilding by participating in the French Grand Prix. That tournament brought together, if not all the strongest athletes, then at least half of the stars of that time. Rich Gaspari, Lee Labrada, Barry DeMay, Bob Paris, Albert Beckles, Francis Benfato. And in such a campaign, Benaziza's debutante did not get lost and took a worthy 8th place among 18 participants. And then he decides to take a swing at Olympia. On September 10, 1988, in Los Angeles, he made his debut at the IFBB main event and just missed the top 10, becoming 11th. And taking into account the level of the tournament and the composition of the Olympia 88 participants, Benaziza's 11th place could be regarded as a real success. Sean Ray, Robbie Robinson, Albert Beckles, and many more famous athletes were left behind. The following year, in 1989, Benaziza trains a lot, travels around Europe, competing at the Grand Prix of Sweden, France, Finland, Spain, Holland, and Germany. And it always ends up in the top 5. And in Holland, he's just a little short of winning. Momo becomes the second only to Lee Labrada. Of course, this is a great honor, but Mohammed regards all these starts as nothing more than a rehearsal for the main tournament of the year, his second Olympia. His goal is to approach it in the best possible way, and he does an amazing job. Comes to Rome and makes a splash by taking 5th place. Benaziza's self-esteem was pleased by the rumors that the great Lee Haney was only afraid of him at that tournament. Lee Labrada became the second at Olympia 89. The third is Vince Taylor. Getting into the top 5 of Olympia is, of course, very cool. However, Benaziza is still without a win in the pro tournaments. Winning prizes at the European Grand Prix is certainly a good thing, but Momo still had the aftertaste. I needed a championship title for my ego. It would have given me strength and raised my status, Benaziza confessed. He spent the autumn and winter of 89 to 90 thinking about this. Our hero took up training with zeal, and soon it turned out that he was training harder than when preparing for the Olympia 89. Initially, Mohammed was going to train for 3 days in a row and then rest for a day. However, in fact, he gave his best in evil for 6 days in a row, after which he gave himself 2 days of rest. Each part of the body was worked out twice a week with 3 to 4 exercises, 4 sets of 15 repetitions each. Benaziza trained his lower body in the mornings and his upper body in the evenings. As a result, Momo added 3 kilograms of lean muscles, and the results were not long in coming. Benaziza, who had no previous victories on the professional stage, won the Grand Prix of France, Finland, Italy, Germany, and Great Britain in 1990, and also became the second in the Netherlands. During this tour, he defeated Gary Stridham 5 times, who was then considered a likely successor to Lee Haney himself. And the cherry on the cake of this whole string of successes is the triumph at the Night of Champions 90, where our hero defeats Dorian Yates himself. On stage, Benaziza weighed 85 kilograms and his muscles were as hard as a rock. There were simply no weaknesses in his build. The Briton surpassed Momo by 20 centimeters in height and by almost 25 kilograms. However, Benaziza defeated Dorian due to a more developed back, after which Yates rocked his back so much that it became the best in the world. Mohammed received $12,000 in prize money for that victory. Momo did not enter the 1990 Olympia, apparently fearing, like many, doping controls. At that time, the Wider brothers were negotiating with the International Olympic Committee to include bodybuilding in the Olympic sports and introduced a doping test at the Olympia as required by the organization's charter. So to speak, we made an exhibition tournament that showed that professional bodybuilding is impossible without anabolic steroids. In general, of course, I wonder what place Benaziza could have hoped for then if he had nevertheless prepared for this very controversial Olympia. In terms of actual form, I think I'm in first or second place, given Haney's worst form that year. But yes, it turned out as it turned out. In the spring of '91, rumors began to spread that Benaziza was no longer the same and was losing ground. The reason was his indistinct form at the Ironman Pro and Arnold Classic tournaments, where he took 9th and 11th places. He lacked the relief of his hips, but in fact the reason for our hero's poor form was that Momo tore his quadriceps doing leg presses a month before the first start. The spring 1992 season did not start for Momo with a very convincing 7th place at the Pittsburgh Pro Tournament, but then Benaziza took silver at the Arnold Classic and got even with his Pittsburgh abusers. Preparing for the '92 Olympia in Helsinki, Momo is gaining new muscle mass. Looking at the photos and videos from that tournament, it seems that Benaziza was the most massive participant. And if it wasn't for his height, he would have weighed the most. But even so, he looked huge. His back was as wide as Yates's wings, and his hips were as powerful as Kevin Levrone. Benaziza was continuously called up for comparisons. The judges simply did not understand where to put him. In the end, they were assigned to the 5th, but I must say that those who were ahead, Yates, Levrone, Labrada, and Ray, looked just phenomenal. Benaziza still had the Grand Prix Tour of Europe in reserve, where he was always lucky. He finished 4th at the British Grand Prix, 2nd at the German Grand Prix, and won the Italian Grand Prix. There was another victory at the Dutch Grand Prix, the last one that cost Momo his life. This is what Mohammed Benaziza's friend Steve Brisbois recalled. Before the Italian Grand Prix, Benaziza did not drink for 3 days. On the morning of the tournament, he took me aside and showed me his hips. When I touched them, they were as hard as a rock. The strange thing was that Momo didn't even bother them. There is no doubt that at that moment he was in a state of severe dehydration. The preliminary judging started at 8 p.m., and it was clear to me from the very beginning that Momo was in trouble. After the first round of proportion comparison, he stood bent over and holding onto the fence, while his girlfriend gave him water. When he was called for an additional comparison, he looked like he was about to die. After the preliminary judging, he vomited, but then he began to look better and completed the free program without any problems. But after that, he started vomiting again, and we started to worry. After the award ceremony, we took a shower, and Momo vomited again. I asked if everything was okay, and he replied that it was. And here's what Porter Cottrell recalled. During the second round, Mohammed started to leave the stage and come back. When the free round started, he was leaning against the wall. I went up to him and offered him a chocolate bar. At that moment, he began to vomit so violently that the vomit flew almost a meter away. I barely dodged it. Alcu Gurley and Ron Love were nearby. We exchanged glances. Momo's girlfriend said he was poisoned by something, but we didn't believe her and decided to call a doctor. Momo couldn't walk, so we carried him to a minibus which took him to a hotel that was a 3-minute walk away. Benaziza was soaked all over and seemed to be paralyzed. They took him to his room and put him on the bed. Momo sighed and said, "I'm fine." The clock showed the beginning of the first night. The doctor was on his way, so I wasn't particularly worried. I went to my room, but I couldn't sleep. I imagined going home. The tournament in Holland was the last one. And I went back to the restaurant, and I went to bed only at 4:30 in the morning. But literally 5 minutes later, Steve Brisbois started banging on my room door. He was shouting, "Momo, it's bad." When we ran into Benaziza's room, he had already been dragged out of bed. He had a cardiac arrest. I started giving him an artificial massage, and the doctor gave him artificial respiration. After 3 to 4 minutes, Momo started vomiting. At that moment, I realized that this was the end. A clear liquid was pouring out of Benaziza's nose. This meant that his lungs were filled with fluid. We continued trying to save Momo for another 20 minutes. I continued to do a heart massage, but Momo quickly turned cold. In total, I did the massage for 40 to 45 minutes. Then the medics put Benaziza on a stretcher and took her away. After some time, a policeman called and asked for permission to enter the room. He said that Mohammed was dead. I left the room and told the others, barely holding back tears. All these testimonies were published in the official IFBB journals. But here's what famous bodybuilder Jim Queen said about Benaziza's death. I talked to the guys who were with Benaziza that day. He choked on vomit in his sleep. The vomiting was caused by taking huge doses of diuretics. Momo took Nubain as a painkiller. He's been bad all day. Everyone saw him throwing up backstage and smiled. He could have withdrawn from the tournament, but he was told that many tickets had been sold for the competition and that if he did not perform, he would be fined. Money killed Benaziza. What conclusions can be drawn here? Let everyone who has watched this video to the end draw their own conclusions. I just told you the story of Mohammed Benaziza. As always, I will be grateful for your support. It helps in the development of the channel. Do not forget to click on the bell so as not to miss the new issue. Thanks for watching, Sports Guru with you. See you later.